Stepping into 2026, many people want to renew themselves with new goals, beautiful plans, or changes in appearance so they can look like a better version of themselves. But according to Machiavelli, true recreation does not arise from the external world. It begins when we pause and look into the place we always hesitate to face, the deepest part of our inner world. That is where the dark patches, the suppressed callings, and the true needs we have quietly denied are stored. And only when you are brave enough to face this forgotten part of yourself does true recreation actually begin. So let me walk alongside you in this journey. In this video, I will guide you through the core inner shifts that Machiavelli sees as the conditions for a human being to be reborn from within. These are not little tips to refresh your life. They are quiet yet powerful movements in the psyche that open the path back to your true self. Before we go further, try pausing for a moment. Ask yourself this. If you step into 2026 with the same belief system, the same fears, the same ways of reacting as you have now, how much will you really be able to recreate yourself? If the answer makes you feel unsettled or you suddenly realize your life will not change that much, then perhaps you have come to the right place, and perhaps it is time for you to stay. Number 1, looking back at the old self, the person you have become. If you want to recreate yourself in 2026, you have to begin with a step that seems simple, but is actually the hardest, looking straight at the person you have become. Machiavelli once said, "The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being." This means that if you want to step into a new version of yourself, you cannot just think about who you want to become. First, you have to clearly see who you already are, not to judge or erase it, but to understand why you are standing at this point in your life. Try thinking about yourself over the past 3 years, not the achievements on your CV, not the beautiful photos you posted on social media. I want you to look at how you behaved, how you endured, how you reacted when you were exhausted, how you tried to act fine even when you were not fine inside. That is your real self, or at least the version you had to become to keep going in your circumstances. Machiavelli called those images the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted, to survive, to fit in. But the persona is not something bad. It is a necessary psychological function. The problem only appears when we begin to identify ourselves with that mask and forget who we were before it. Some people have spent the entire past year living as the strong one, always able to carry everything. For them, vulnerability becomes a luxury. Others live as the agreeable one, always soft, always avoiding conflict to the point that their real needs are shaved away day after day. Some play the role of the rational one, never allowing themselves to be wrong, never daring to take risks, never daring to live according to their intuition. Every role like that is born for a reason. They are formed in moments when you feel no one is protecting you, or when you realize the only way not to get hurt is to cover up your true self with an image that others would find easier to accept. Ask yourself, which role did you live in the most in 2025, and which role exhausted you the most? This is not a question about preferences or habits. This is a question about the meaning of existence. For how many days and months have you not lived as yourself? The danger is that when the persona becomes too active, it makes us believe that it is our essence. This identification is what leaves us drained without understanding why, because we have spent too much energy maintaining an image instead of nourishing the true self. When you look back at the years that have passed, you will see that the person you are today is not only shaped by the roles you have worn. You are also made of the opposite, the cracks, the losses, the wounds you never had the time to name. The persona is the mask you consciously created, but pain is what has quietly carved itself into you from behind. Both, though opposite, have contributed to forming who you are right now. Think about it for a moment. There are things you no longer believe in. Some desires once burned fiercely, but at some point went out. There are things you used to endure better than now, and there are things you used to fear, but now face more calmly. That is not a random change. It is the trace of what you have been through. Someone who has been betrayed learns to observe more deeply. Someone who has been hurt because they trusted the wrong person becomes more cautious. Someone who has experienced great loss understands that joy and sorrow are no longer as separate as before. These are not just wounds. They are a psychological structure that has been reshaped over time. Yet we often look back at ourselves with an attitude of blame. If only I was stronger. If only I were not so weak. If only back then I had not been so soft-hearted. But Machiavelli offers another perspective. Those experiences did not come to destroy you. They came to bring you closer to yourself. Pain is not something we must hate. Pain is a message. It is a sign that a part of you is asking to be heard. You may have never said this out loud, but try this. Is it possible that it was precisely those times you collapsed that taught you how to stand up more slowly but more firmly? It was those losses that taught you to cherish the smallest things. It was loneliness that taught you how to befriend yourself. Take someone who has gone through a divorce, for example. They become more reserved, seemingly colder. Outwardly, everyone thinks they have become hard to approach. But in truth, inside they are trying to protect a territory that has once been shattered. And from that territory, they have learned discernment, learned how to listen to their intuition. That is a kind of growth no one sees, but it forms the truest core of who they are. When they look back, they might think they failed, but in reality, they are simply carrying the experience that keeps them from repeating old fractures. And that is a powerful form of emotional wisdom. Or picture someone who has lost a loved one. The loss makes them withdraw, talk less, get emotional easily, and find it hard to trust stability. But underneath that is a heart that knows how to love more deeply than words can say. A heart that knows every moment is precious. The loss is painful, but it makes that person more subtle, more genuine. If they only view themselves through the lens of blame, they will say they are weak. But if they look deeper, they will see that pain opened a new level of awareness. Recreating yourself does not mean denying your past. You do not need to erase the old parts. You only need to understand that those parts protected you, taught you, and shaped you. So when you look back, look with gratitude. The persona helped you survive when you were not strong enough. Wounds made you grow when you did not want to. Loss opened a depth you did not have before. Pain reminded you that this heart is still alive. And when you look at your old self with grateful eyes, you finally have the capacity to recreate because you are no longer fighting against yourself. You accept that you are a product of both light and shadow. Ask yourself gently just once, if it were not for those pains, would I be the person I am today? And when you can answer that, you will see that the first step of recreating yourself is not change, but recognizing the value of the journey you have already walked. Number 2, stepping into the shadow. When you have looked back at your old self with honesty and gratitude, another door appears right behind it. The door leading into your own darkness. If the previous part answered the question, who have I become after all the pain and loss? Then this part touches a harder question. Of all the things that make up who I am, what am I trying not to look at? For Machiavelli, that is the shadow. In Machiavelli psychology, the shadow is not simply the bad part. It is the whole of what your conscious mind does not want to acknowledge as me. Emotions judged as inappropriate. Desires labeled as weak or shameful. Capacities that were once shut down. Traits that do not fit the image you want to project. As a child, you quickly learn the rules. What is praised is kept. What is criticized is pushed down. Gradually, an invisible border forms in your mind. On one side is who I am. On the other, the pieces that are rejected and pushed into the dark. Those pieces do not disappear. They become shadow. Persona and shadow always go together. The more you try to be acceptable, strong, positive, kind, and perfect, the more anything that does not match that image gets pushed deeper down. Someone who builds a persona of always calm often has a shadow full of suppressed anger. Someone with a highly self-sacrificing persona often has a shadow full of unacknowledged selfishness and personal needs. Stepping into the shadow means you accept looking at your other side, the part you are not proud of, do not like, or even feel ashamed of. Here, there is a big difference between a moral viewpoint and a psychological one. When you try too hard to be a good person, you unintentionally push every not good impulse into the dark. But they do not vanish. They return as outbursts, self-sabotage, or behaviors you yourself cannot understand. One of the clearest ways the shadow expresses itself is through projection. Which types of people frequently irritate you? What traits do you quickly judge in others? Those strong emotional spikes are traces of the shadow. When you say, "I hate showy people," it may be that a part of you craves recognition, but was taught that shining is not humble. When you are annoyed by those who are too sensitive, it may be that your own vulnerability has been dismissed for too long. When you look down on dreamers, it may be that your creative part was suppressed, so you could live a safer life. You see in others what you do not allow yourself to be. That is how the shadow knocks on your door. If your own shadow has also knocked in a very particular way, you can leave a line below as a small trace of that journey. Who knows, your story might help the shadow in someone else soften. But the shadow does not only hold bad things. Machiavelli emphasized that the shadow also contains unlived potential, talents that were mocked, dreams that were crushed, bold, alive, wild parts that were stamped unrealistic. So stepping into the shadow is not just facing anger, jealousy, shame, and fear. It is also going to finding the capacities you abandoned to be accepted. Why do this in the new year? Because the shadow does not lie still. It operates through recurring patterns. You say, "Why do I always end up in the same kind of relationship? Why do I keep choosing jobs that burn me out?" Those are not just bad luck, but signs that the unconscious is trying to show you a part of yourself. The shadow uses circumstances to talk to you. Stepping into the shadow, then, is not some mystical ritual, but an attitude toward living. Instead of rushing to rationalize every emotion, you dare to sit with the discomfort. Instead of immediately blaming the outside, you dare to ask, "What part of me is being touched here?" Instead of instantly labeling something as bad, weak, wrong, you dare to treat your feelings as data. What is this anger trying to protect? What is this jealousy pointing to that I truly want? This shame, what rule that I absorbed is it coming from? When you shift from judgment to curiosity, from running away to listening, you have stepped into the realm of the shadow without punishing yourself. Beyond the personal, Machiavelli also spoke of the collective shadow. We grow up in a culture that worships strength, achievement, productivity, and positive thinking. As a result, an entire society pushes things like weakness, slowing down, rest, intuition, and inner care into the dark. When you feel ashamed simply because you are tired, sad, or want to rest, that is not just a personal belief. It is the voice of a collective shadow speaking through you. Recognizing this helps you feel less like something is wrong with me, and understand that returning to your own shadow is also an act of defying collective conditioning. To truly step into the shadow in the new year, you do not need a grand declaration. You only need to begin with very small moments when you notice yourself overreacting, when you see yourself judging others more harshly than usual, when a feeling rises and you are tempted to push it down quickly. Those are small doors leading into the shadow. Each time you choose to stay with that feeling a little longer, to look straight at it instead of fleeing into work, social media, or shopping, you are doing something deeply Machiavellian, bringing a piece of shadow into consciousness. It is quiet work. No one applauds it, but it changes the structure of your inner world, and right there, something new opens up. Stepping into the shadow is the transitional step you must take before you can truly converse with the unconscious. Only when you stop running away from yourself can you become still enough to hear the ancient wisdom whispering within. Number 3. Dialogue with the unconscious. If stepping into the shadow is like standing in front of the closed doors inside the house of your soul, Then dialoguing with the unconscious is when you walk through those doors to explore the room of wisdom you have never really noticed. This is a different layer of awareness, lighter yet deeper. No longer just repressed emotions, but symbols, intuitions, images, dreams. The things Machiavelli believed are the true language of the soul. The unconscious Machiavelli speaks of is not just a storage room for forgotten memories. It is far larger than that. One layer is the personal unconscious, where your individual experiences, fears, obsessions, and desires are held. But deeper still is the collective unconscious, where the archetypes, symbols, and ancient wisdom of humanity live and move within each of us regardless of era or culture. When you enter into dialogue with the unconscious, you are not only touching your personal history, you are touching the wider stream of human existence as a whole. That is why Machiavelli called it the meeting between consciousness and the inner guide. The deepest part of you, where you are no longer bound by logic, by roles, or by old stories. But how do you converse with something invisible? The only way is to use the language the unconscious has always used, images. One of the most accessible doors is dreams. Nothing in a dream is random. Every image that appears is a message. Machiavelli analyzed that dreams never speak directly, they speak through symbols. For example, if your conscious self keeps trying to appear strong, but inside you are exhausted, the unconscious may send you a dream where you are running but unable to lift your feet. If you are avoiding conflict, you might dream of people whispering behind your back. These images are not weird. They are condensed messages from psychic currents you have not dared to look at directly. A practical exercise. Every morning, as soon as you wake up, write down your dream within the first 60 seconds. Do not edit, do not analyze, simply record. After a week, you will start to see recurring motifs. After a month, you will begin to see what your unconscious is trying to say. The second door to the unconscious is active imagination. The method Machiavelli saw as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind. Instead of avoiding an image that troubles you, you choose to stay with it. You close your eyes. Let the symbol appear and allow it to speak to you. It may sound strange, but this is one of Machiavelli's deepest therapeutic methods. You converse with parts of yourself through images. For instance, if you always feel an invisible resistance whenever you want to change, imagine that resistance as a character. It could be a frightened child. It could be a defensive animal. You ask, what do you need? The answer does not come from fantasy, but from the unconscious trying to speak in the language of symbols. Active imagination is not play acting. It is a way of watching your own soul in motion. The third door is active silence, not meditation in the sense of forcing yourself not to think, but allowing the mind and its stream of thoughts to flow naturally so you can see what arises when you stop trying to control everything. When you spend 5 to 10 minutes a day doing nothing, not scrolling your phone, not trying to focus, you begin to notice thoughts that do not come from rational planning, but from a deeper layer. Soft intuitions, fleeting images, subtle sensations that have never been named. That is the unconscious whispering. Someone who always suppresses their emotions might suddenly feel a small sadness they have never previously allowed to surface. Someone who always avoids risk might hear a faint calling toward a new direction. To dialogue with the unconscious effectively, there is one important principle. Do not rush to explain. Observe first, understand later. The conscious mind loves to slap labels on things. This dream is just stress. This feeling is nonsense. This image means nothing. But the unconscious never speaks in nonsense. Every time you judge too quickly, the door closes. Practice looking at images with curiosity instead. Ask open questions. What did this come here for? Why now? What is it trying to protect in me? When you ask in the right way, the unconscious responds with a strange consistency. Most importantly, dialoguing with the unconscious makes you less lost. When the unconscious begins to participate, you start making choices with depth. Many people change their whole lives simply by, for the first time, clearly hearing and honestly responding to the small voice. What do I truly want? And when that voice becomes clear, everything else starts to shift. Dialogue with the unconscious does not make you lose control as many fear. It makes you more genuine, less torn inside, less at war with yourself. You are no longer yanked back and forth between should and want, between mask and true self. The inner conflict begins to quiet. You feel more whole even when you are not yet perfect. Number 4. Finding the archetype that rules you and the archetype you want to live in 2026. When you have begun conversing with the unconscious, the inner images and movements become clearer. That is the right moment to step into a deeper layer, archetypes. If the shadow is the part you reject, and the unconscious is the voice of the soul, then archetypes are the ancient life patterns moving you from behind without your awareness. They are like underground currents beneath the psyche, unseen yet always guiding. From the previous part, once you have heard the voice within, you begin to recognize whose voice it is. In Machiavellian psychology, archetypes are not rigid stereotypes. They are psychological motifs that have existed throughout human history. The hero, the healer, the wanderer, the mother, the rebel. Each archetype is a form of energy, and every single one of us is living according to one or several of these energies without realizing it. They are structures deeper than personality. They are how the soul operates. To understand why archetypes matter for self-recreation, you have to see one thing clearly. You do not just live according to your will. You live according to the energy that dominates you. Some carry the energy of the warrior, so they always have to fight, prove themselves, and win. Some carry the energy of the caregiver, so they constantly forget themselves and hold everyone else's burdens. Some live as the innocent, always waiting for someone to save them, always hoping life will get better on its own. No archetype is inherently good or bad. The problem is if you let an outdated archetype rule you for too long. Your life will keep revolving in the same pattern, and you will not be able to truly recreate yourself. This is why Machiavelli emphasized, if you want to grow up psychologically, you have to know which archetype is using you so you can begin to use it consciously instead. To identify the archetype currently ruling you, start with the patterns that repeat in your life. If you are always drawn into battles, competition, and spaces where you have to prove yourself, the warrior is likely leading. If you are constantly exhausted from caring for others and feel guilty whenever you put yourself first, that is the caregiver. If you are frequently confused, cannot find your direction, always changing jobs, goals, lovers, you might be living as the wanderer, always moving but never arriving. If you keep sabotaging good opportunities because you are afraid of responsibility, that is the saboteur. But do not stop at spotting what is dominating you. Machiavelli always pointed toward wholeness, toward awakening the archetype that matches the stage of your soul's development. The year 2026 is not just a year to break out of old patterns. It is the year to name who inside you will lead you forward. This is the key question. Which archetype do you want to become the leading energy of your 2026? One way to choose your 2026 archetype is to look at what you most long for but have not yet lived. If you crave freedom, authenticity, the ability to live without fear of judgment, the rebel's energy is calling you. If you want to live true to your intuition instead of chasing roles, the sage is touching you. If you feel a quiet creative force stirring within, the creator may be demanding space. The unconscious will send you signals through dreams, feelings, and symbols. Listen. And if while listening up to this point, an archetype gently surfaces, rises in your mind, give yourself a few moments of true stillness. Stop listening. Stop analyzing. Just sit with that feeling for a while. Sometimes it is precisely the moment you pause that the unconscious speaks most clearly. Let that silence lead you one step further inward. Once you have chosen an archetype, the most important step is to live with it. Machiavelli stressed that archetypes are only potential. They only have power when you act them out in your life. Ask yourself, if I lived as a hero in 2026, what would I do differently? If I stepped into the sage's energy, what would I stop doing? If I let the Creator, lead me. What would I finally allow myself to do without fear of being wrong? For an archetype to function, you must begin acting as if you already are that person, even in the smallest things. The hero begins with a single uncertain step. The sage begins by sitting with themselves for 5 more minutes each day. The creator begins with a line of writing, a stroke of paint, a small idea that does not have to be perfect. The healer begins by treating themselves kindly for the first time in years. Archetypes are an inner orientation. When you choose the right archetype, your entire psychological structure starts to reorganize itself to match that way of being. And that is what it means to recreate yourself in the Machiavellian sense. You do not change to be like someone else. You become exactly the person your soul has always wanted you to be. When the right archetype is activated, the scattered pieces of you start to come together. You feel less conflicted. You stop spinning in old loops. Life feels deeper, more directed, more soulful. And at that point, you are ready for the next step of the journey. The step Machiavelli called the core of psychological maturity, individuation. And if by now you can feel something in you beginning to shift, a small door opening, hold on to that moment. Journeys like this need a place you can return to whenever you lose your rhythm. If this content has truly touched you, you can leave a small sign by hitting like or subscribe, not for me, but so that you yourself remember that you have already stepped into a new current. Number 5, stepping into the individuation journey. The concept of individuation is often misunderstood as becoming different or asserting yourself. But in Machiavelli view, it is far more subtle. It is the process of gathering back all the parts of yourself that were lost, placing them in their rightful positions, and letting the ego step down from the throne so that the self, the center of the entire psyche, can lead. Individuation is not about upgrading yourself. It is about returning to inner wholeness. Someone who has stepped onto this path no longer has to play a role in public and then take off the mask at home. They live as one single person wherever they are. And that is the deepest form of freedom Machiavelli speaks of to begin the individuation journey in 2026. You need to understand that this is not a project you complete. It is like a change of seasons. You cannot control it, but you can open the door for it to unfold. The first step is to accept the parts of yourself that seem to be in opposition. You can be both strong and sensitive, both logical and intuitive, both independent and in need of love, both creative and practical. Society tells you to pick one. Individuation teaches you to let both coexist. A man who is taught to always be strong cannot individuate if he refuses to acknowledge his softness. A woman who has always been pushed to stay gentle cannot individuate if she does not dare to name her inner strength. When you allow opposites to stand side by side, balance begins to form. The next step of individuation is to stop living according to other people's expectations. This sounds familiar, but it is incredibly hard to do, because expectations do not only come from outside, they also live in the unconscious. The rules you absorbed from family, culture, and childhood. I must succeed to have value. When you begin individuating, you gradually realize those sentences are not your true voice. They are psychological inheritances you have been carrying for too long. Machiavelli called this the process of separating consciousness from collective images. When you break away from those old voices, your real voice finally has room to speak. A practical exercise for 1 week. Every time you make a decision, big or small, ask yourself, is this choice coming from myself or from fear? The self makes you expand. Fear makes you shrink. When you start to discern these two voices, you have already set 1 foot into individuation. Individuation also demands another process, making peace with past fragments you never dared to touch to reconnect with your inner world. You cannot become new if the past is still pulling you back, and the past does not disappear just because you refuse to think about it. It dissolves when you look at it with different eyes. Many people spend their whole lives running away from a single memory, but when they stop and face it, they realize it no longer controls them. One image Machiavelli loved to use for individuation is that of an old tree. When it is young, the tree grows upward very quickly in search of light. But when it matures, it begins to send its roots deeper down. The deeper the roots, the more firmly it stands in storms. The individuation process is the same. You no longer rush forward just to reach goals. You begin to root inward to find your true spiritual foundation. When the roots are deep, you are no longer swayed by praise or criticism, success, failure, gain, or loss. You live from the inside out, not from the outside in. An important part of individuation is reconciliation between the ego and the self. The ego is necessary for you to exist in society, to distinguish yourself from others, and to have goals and boundaries. But the ego cannot lead forever because it only sees what is familiar. The self is different. It is the true center of the whole psyche where intuition, values, creative instinct, and primordial wisdom reside. Individuation is the process by which the ego steps down from its role as leader and becomes the servant of the self. You do not eliminate the ego, you put it in its proper place, and when that happens, you start living with a strange clarity. You know what belongs to you and what does not. You know when to move forward and when to stop. The core of individuation is living in alignment with your values, not the values you were taught, but the values that arise from your center. When you live by those values, you feel honest with yourself. So, choose 3 core values for 2026 to remind yourself every day. Values are the compass that leads you from ego to self. When you have come this far, the journey of recreating yourself in the Machiavellian sense is no longer an abstract idea. It is already unfolding through the layers of your mind, and in the next part, we will bring all of these deep inner layers into lived reality through concrete actions, habits, and small choices so that you can live a 2026 that is whole from the inside out. Number 6. Practicing recreation. Recreative action is not a to-do list. It is a new way of living in which you constantly adjust to protect the true self that has just been born. And because lasting change grows out of small things, you will begin with quiet but weighty acts. The first act is resetting your mental habits. Spend 5 minutes every morning on a small ritual of listening to yourself. Some people write a single line, "How am I feeling today?" Some place a hand on their chest and take a deep breath to see what the body wants to say. Some spend 2 minutes observing the flow of thoughts as if they were standing outside of them. When you give yourself a few minutes each day to turn inward, you create an anchor point that helps the rest of your day move in the direction of the self instead of old habits. Another important recreative act is putting your living space back in order. The outer space mirrors the inner structure. A room filled with old, cluttered, no longer fitting objects will unconsciously hold you back with stories that are no longer yours. Look around your space and ask yourself, does this still reflect who I am in 2026? If the answer is no, dare to let it go. Conversely, keep or add objects that symbolize your new journey. A notebook, a photo, a small item that reminds you of the archetype trying to emerge. This is a psychological technique. Matter holds energy. When you choose what is allowed to stay close to you, you are choosing what is allowed to influence your mind. After space comes soulful goals. You no longer set goals to prove your worth or to compensate for inner lack. Goals in the recreation journey must arise from the self, not from fear. Instead of "I will lose weight," ask "How do I want my body to feel?" Instead of "I will make more money," ask "What do I want my relationship with work to become?" When a goal comes from within, it pulls you forward on its own instead of forcing you to drag yourself along. You can set 3 goals for 2026, but each one must have a reason that comes from the soul, not from pressure. What matters is not the size of the goal, but its authenticity. One of the most practical and difficult acts in this journey is practicing boundaries. Boundaries do not mean cold walls. They are declarations of your self-worth. When you say no to what makes you shrink, you are saying yes to what makes you grow. When you refuse what exhausts you, you are giving yourself more room to breathe. Boundaries are your truth in action. If in the past you lived as someone who constantly yielded to be loved, then setting boundaries is the first step in loving yourself. If you have accepted less than you deserve, boundaries are how you recreate your self-respect. Without boundaries, there is no recreation. Another subtle recreative act is allowing instinct and intuition to participate in everyday life. This does not mean living impulsively. It means allowing yourself to notice the small signals the unconscious sends up. For example, the tightening in your chest when you step into a certain place, the sense of ease when you think about a new choice, the vague urge to learn a particular skill. These signals may seem small, but they are exactly how the self guides you. When you get used to listening to intuition, you begin to walk in the right direction without having to strain. The final and hardest recreative act is patience with becoming. Every Machiavellian journey unfolds in spirals, moving forward, pausing, falling back, then rising to a deeper level. Do not assume you are failing when you find yourself returning to an old version on some days. That is how the unconscious recalibrates you from within. When you are patient, you give your soul enough time to change its structure, not just its behavior. In the end, recreate yourself is not a self-editing project, but a promise. A promise to yourself that from 2026 onward, you will betray your own feelings less, ignore your pain less, and use your outer life less as a cover for the emptiness inside. True recreation does not make you more perfect in the eyes of others. It gives you the courage to live according to what you have seen within. You may still feel confused, still afraid, still have days when the old life pulls you back. But the difference is that this time you know where you are headed. 2026 then is not a destination but a marker. It is the year you stop asking, how do I become a better version of myself, and start asking, how do I live more truthfully with my soul? The rest of the journey, time will walk with you.